Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have a ranking video for you, and that is for the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. Now that I have finally read The Lost Metal, I figured I would rank all 7 Mistborn books for you. Been very excited to do this. I've been planning to do this video ever since I have been getting closer to finishing this series. And I figured once I read The Lost Metal, I'd do it, and now I've recently done that, and so here I am. I will be allowing myself to talk spoilers in this video. Be warned that I may be spoiling some things in this video, just so you're aware of that. And also, I enjoy all of these books, so even if one of your favorites is towards the bottom of my list, I still enjoyed it. I would consider, I'd say 5 out of the 7 books to be minimum, like 9 out of 10. And I would consider even my bottom 2 to still be like a solid 7.5 or 8. I love pretty much all the Cosmere books, and I love all of the Mistborn books. So even if something here is low, I still enjoy it quite a bit. So I suppose we'll get right started into it with my number 7, which is going to be The Alloy of Law, the first book of Mistborn Era 2. This is probably my least favorite Cosmere book in general, but again, not to say it's bad. I still enjoy this book. I think it's a great introduction to Era 2, introducing this new time period now that it's been a few hundred years since Era 1, kind of showing the different tone, introducing new characters, things like that. I also really enjoy the villain of this book. I think it was Miles 100 Lives, if I remember correctly. I thought he was an interesting villain, and it just did a good job of like setting the stage for Era 2. But the reason why I put it at the bottom of my list is because of the Mistborn books and of the Cosmere books in general. This is one of the ones that I find the least memorable looking back on it. I don't remember it all that well. I remember enjoying it. I remember enjoying the new tone, the new characters, things like that. But it just didn't really stick with me the same way as a lot of the other books. And that's pretty much the only reason it ends up at the bottom. Like, it's still a very solid, enjoyable book in its own right. It just doesn't stick with me the same way that the other ones did. Then at number 6, I have The Bands of Mourning, which is book 3 of Era 2. This one I also enjoyed quite a bit, but again is lower on the list for me of Cosmere in general, and of course for Mistborn. But from here on out, like all the books above these two I think are fantastic. These two I just think are very good, but not quite on the same level. This one I did enjoy, but it kind of suffers from the same issue for me as Alloy of Law, in that it didn't stick with me that much. I didn't find it incredibly memorable. However, I do think that the ending was quite memorable, even though when I was first reading through it, the ending, for some reason, at times wasn't quite super gripping to me. I do find it very memorable. You have Wax's near brush with death and his kind of epic moment that he has, and you have like the new cultures and things. I forget the name of the culture that's introduced in this book, but from like the southern part of the world, and things like that. It's kind of an interesting book because it kind of expands on the world in that way, which I thought was really cool. And the ending of the book I think was memorable, even though I maybe didn't love it all the way through. First time I read it, I do find it very memorable. But the rest of the book, the first good portion of the book, was just not as memorable to me. It did definitely have some good stuff to it that I enjoyed, and again, I enjoyed all of these books, so this one I think was still good. It just wasn't quite as great as some of the other ones. So then at number 5, I have one, which, like I said, all the rest of these I think are fantastic, so ranking them is kind of difficult for me. And even this one I kind of would like to have higher, but I decided to put it at number 5, and that is going to be The Hero of Ages. The final book of Era 1. This is a fantastic conclusion, and I love the twists and turns that it makes. I said I would allow spoilers, so I'm gonna go with spoilers on this one. I loved the twist of Sazed being the hero of ages. I think that was a fantastically done. It was one of those things where I reread the trilogy earlier this year, and it's one of those things where when you are rereading it, you pick up on all the details about it, and it's so obvious when you kind of look back knowing, but the first time through you don't necessarily catch it all unless you're really paying attention, and I thought that was really cool. I loved that twist. I loved just the epic feeling that this one has. To me, first book is very much like the fantasy heist with the Master Apprentice plotline. And then the second book is very political. This one to me is just full epic fantasy. Like it's just it feels like it has a bigger scale, bigger scope. Obviously, you're dealing with gods and things like that with ruin and everything. And it's just a really excellent conclusion. I also really liked Spook's side of the story the second time I read this. First time I didn't love it quite as much, but he really resonated with me the second time around. And it's just a fantastic conclusion to Era 1, and does a great job of closing that chapter of the story, while also kind of setting up the future with like the kind of restoring of the world and things like that. It's a really, really awesome conclusion, and I love it a lot. Wish I could have it higher. I considered putting this at number 4, but I decided to put it at number 5. So my number 4 is going to be Shadows of Self, Book 2 of Era 2. I have in the past said that this was my favorite Mistborn book. And the reason why it has moved down is because, like I said just a minute ago, I reread the first trilogy earlier this year, and I loved all 3 of them. And because of that, this one has moved down a little bit since then. Obviously, as you can tell by the way the ranking's gone, I still have the first 2 books of Era 2 ahead of this one. So it did move down for me a little bit, but it is still a fantastic book. There are moments from this book that I still remember very vividly, like action scenes and things like that I really remember. The ending of this book was heartbreaking to me and really made me feel for Wax. I think just the end of this book was excellently done. I think this was just, in general, I think of the Era 2 books, even though, again, you can kind of tell by the way that I've ranked these, there is one Era 2 book still remaining that I haven't talked about. But I think this is probably the overall strongest Era 2 book, where it's just really, really well done, and like just for the length of it, for the pacing of it, for the memorability of it, all that stuff is just super, super well done, and I enjoyed it a lot. And this is the one, I think, where I also really started to connect a lot more with the characters, especially Wax. Yeah, great book in general. Again, used to be my favorite Mistborn book, but has since moved down, but it's still a fantastic book, so, number 4 is not that bad. So number 3, this one I also have been trying to figure out where I was going to place it. This one was going to go either in 3 or 2, and I decided to put it in 3. Could go either way. Maybe tomorrow I'll wake up and decide that I would rather have this at number 2, but for the sake of this video, I'm putting it at number 3, and that is going to be The Final Empire, the very first Mistborn book. This is very similar to me in terms of how I feel about it as Shadows of Self, where I said Shadows of Self is just an excellently constructed book, really well done. I think that this, despite it not being my favorite Mistborn book, is the one that I personally would probably consider to be the best Mistborn book in terms of its overall construction, in terms of how it does its plot and its characters. There's nothing that feels like it needs to be trimmed down from this book to me. Everything feels like it has a place here. Everything that is here feels like it needs to be there. There's nothing that feels superfluous or unnecessary. It's super well done, really tightly plotted, really well foreshadowed, does a great job of introducing all of its characters, all the crew, and Vin, and kind of the way that it does its plot of setting up the heist, but then ending up with overthrowing the Lord Ruler, and all that stuff. And not only that, but also I really like about this book how it works really well as a book 1, because with the last words of the Lord Ruler and everything, it very clearly is setting up a series. But then you also could theoretically read this book by itself if you wanted to. If you're looking into Sanderson and you just want to read one book and you decide it's not for you, you still get a complete story that leaves hints for the future, but still is pretty self-contained. I also enjoy that about it as well. So overall, just a really fantastically done book, and I would say probably the quote-unquote best Mistborn book, but not quite my personal favorite. Number 2 is gonna be the most recent Mistborn book, and the one that I just read quite recently, and that is The Lost Metal, the 4th book of Era 2. This one could very well be recency bias because I just read this book within the last couple weeks, but I do think it is deserving of this spot. At the very least, I'd put this at number 3. I might switch this with The Final Empire, but right now I'm thinking Lost Metal is my second favorite. This one there's so many things I liked about this book. First of all, I really love the tone of this book, where Era 2 has this very kind of adventurous, fun tone. Not that Era 1 isn't also fun, but Era 2 very much more so, I think, has that kind of adventurous feel to it. And it combines that with the epic feel that Era 1 has to it, which I really enjoyed about it. It felt like it was the biggest book in Era 2, both literally and figuratively. And also had some really fulfilling character arcs. The ending of Wayne's arc, of course, where he dies at the end and everything, sacrificing himself for the greater good, was such an amazing moment. And Wayne in general, I think, was the big highlight of this book for me. Whereas I think Shadows of Self, Wax was the highlight there, Wayne was the highlight for me in Lost Metal. I really enjoyed his part of this book a lot. And also the Cosmere connections, even though I think maybe they were a little bit much in some places, especially where this was the first Cosmere book that really went into the Cosmere connections. I did enjoy that a lot as a fan. It felt very exciting, and things like that, and just is an excellent conclusion to Era 2. And I also just really like seeing the advancements that were made in the world in this book as well, since Bands of Mourning. Not only was there a big gap of time between the two books being released, but even in world, there was still several years in between there, so even seeing technological advancements and world building and things was really cool. So a lot of cool stuff with this book. I really enjoyed it a lot. It was just a fun adventure that I just had a blast with. And that's the main reason I put it over the Final Empire, even though I think Final Empire, I'll just call it Mistborn. Even though I think Mistborn is maybe the better book, this one to me was just so much fun to read. And Mistborn also was a lot of fun to read, but this one I just think was really, really well done, and I had a great time with it. That leaves, of course, only one book remaining for the #1 spot, which is The Well of Ascension. This is one in the wider Cosmere community that I've seen a lot of people list as their least favorite Era 1 book, and not only that, but sometimes even their least favorite Mistborn book, which I just do not understand. I love this book. It is slower paced than the other two books of Era 1, I think, especially the first book. First book's pretty fast paced, I think, compared to this one. But I love the scale of this book. It makes the scale much larger, not as large as in Hero of Ages, but larger and much more political, which I think was interesting. I just love the concept of this book of, we brought down this major force in the first book that was like, the Final Empire. Now where do we go from there? How do we form a new government? How do we enforce our rule and things like that? How do we handle bad situations that come our way early in the life of this new society and things like that? And I thought that was super interesting. And I loved Vin and Ellen's development and their relationship in this book as well. That was also really fantastically done. And again, the twists and turns of like the Well of Ascension and where it was and things like that is a lot of fun. And I love the mystery build up in this book too as well. I think that's probably the place where it was strongest in the trilogy for me, where it was kind of posing all these questions, and some of the answers you get, some of the answers you don't get till book 3, and I just really enjoyed that about it as well. And just overall, I love this book. I get why people maybe don't have it as highly, because it is slower, it's more political, it's not as action heavy. It still has plenty of action in it, but it's not as action heavy and exciting as some of the other books. But this one I just absolutely love, and even on my reread, I was wondering if it would move down on my reread, and as difficult as it is for me to rank the original trilogy, because I loved all 3 of them, I would still say this one remains at the top because I just love it a lot. So that's pretty much all I've got to say about that one, I suppose. So that pretty much wraps up my ranking. Let me know in the comments what you thought of it, if you agree with any of my picks, if you disagree with any of them, if you have read all of the Mistborn books, which I hope you have, because if you haven't, then I've just spoiled them all for you. Let me know in the comments what your ranking is, and all that stuff. I think this is a fun series to see people's different opinions on, because all the books I think are very different from one another. I don't think there is any single book in this series that is similar to the others entirely. They all have their unique qualities to them, so it's interesting to see where people rank different books, which I think is really cool. So that's pretty much it for this video, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.